So this is a Pride webinar. So we want to know, where are you celebrating Pride, in what fashion? We want to know. Feel free to be on camera, off camera. I know this is lunchtime for some folks, especially towards California area. Hey Jessica, nice to see you. Yes, from Maryland. We love working with our partners in Maryland and are so glad that Maryland is represented by you here today, Jessica. Feel free to keep dropping, those names and locations and how you're celebrating Pride. We want to know. Yes, I love seeing all of these locations come in. Hey Dee, it's so good to get a chance to see you again. Just a couple of months ago, back in January, I was at you all's Garden State Equality conference. So it's
Yes,
always
she
good to see you.
was. Good to see you. As soon as I
Good to
heard your
hear.
voice, I was like, okay.
It's even better to hear you. Thank you so much for being here. Ooh, Connecticut is representing. Hey, Jonathan.
Hi there. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Doing well, thank you.
Good, good. We know we have folks from all around the country, in Alaska, also in Tennessee. We know there's a lot going on in so many parts of the country, especially when it comes to anti-queer and trans legislation. Tennessee, Texas, Florida being some of the most prominent that we're hearing about. And so we really wanted to just, before we kind of get started and dive in, we really want to just take a chance to hold space for that, and also to just acknowledge the work that you all are doing. It's a big, it says a whole lot to me and to everyone else at our organization and just queer people around the country, that you could have been in any other room at this time and you chose to be here learning about what you can do to engage our communities. It's not even Pride Month, but you're here to learn more about how to engage and include queer communities. And we're so, so, so honored to have you. I'm going to shout out a few more of the places, and then we'll go ahead and get started with team introductions. Yes, West Virginia, hey, Reverend Kay, always good to see you in the room. Let's see, we're actually doing a presentation and training in West Virginia in just a couple of months. Well, no, sorry, a couple of weeks. And it's going to be cancer focused. So we're really excited and always love the work that we get to do in your state. Hello, Mercedes.
Where are you? Where are you doing your thing?
It's with their cancer, the comprehensive cancer um coalition, right now.
Yeah, it's with their state cancer screening clinics for colorectal cancer.
So we'll definitely have to shout out and let them know that we saw you here today. Got some folks from California in the room. Dee says, I've been surprised since I was a teenager. My favorite part is seeing parents support their adult children. I always stop happy tears. I love that. I have the biggest space in my heart for parents, especially for supporting their queer and trans children. I love, love, love that. Heather has been to 2 Pride festivals and planning to attend another one in May. We love to hear that. Era saying, I love Pride, especially when folks get decked out in Pride gear. I absolutely love, love, love that. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. And so, first of all, I'm just going to throw it around to all of our staff at the National LGBT Cancer Network to introduce ourselves. And then we can get rocking and rolling into what is going to be a phenomenal training. And so I'm going to go ahead and throw it on over to Noel, and then Noel, feel free to pass it to other folks on our team.
Come off mute. Hey everyone, my name is Noel Larkin. I'm a project manager at the National LGBT Cancer Network. I'm based in Detroit, Michigan, and I use he, him pronouns. And go ahead, Bryce.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I didn't know you were going to throw it to me. Hi, everyone. I am Bryce Kahari. Many of you already know me. I'm the training and technical assistance manager here at the network. What that translates to is I do a lot of trainings. And I get to work with incredible folks like you all on the call. I am based in yet another hard state to do queer work in Mississippi. I am so honored to get a chance to be here. I always say that I believe time is one of the most valuable resources we have, and it says a lot that you all took the time to be with us here today. I'm going to be acting as host if you haven't figured that out already. We're so grateful that our staff are all helping out. Noel's going to be doing a presentation in just a little bit, and I will throw it to Shai.
All right. Hi there. My name is Shai Silat, and I'm a project associate here at the network, and I primarily work on N2S and cancer leaders like us. And I will pass it over to Sean.
Hey friends, Sean Riley here. I use they, them, theirs pronouns, and I am in the very fun state of Tennessee, Nashville, Tennessee. And I will pass it over to Bryce.
Thank you so much, team, for introducing yourselves. It always amazes me just how incredibly talented our staff is. I mean, and also we're lucky enough to work with staff across the country who are dealing with their own troubles, like Sean in Tennessee, myself in Mississippi. We really appreciate all of our staff for showing up and doing the hard, necessary work that it takes to engage our communities and do the work that we're all supposed to be doing. And so thank you all so much for sharing. Shai, if you can go ahead and pull back up those slides, we're going to preview the agenda, and then we are jumping right on in, y'all, to Noel's presentation, so you can stop hearing me yap and get to see what we are here to see. We're going to be able to see Noel's presentation that's representing our network, and then we have two incredible, phenomenal, amazing folks here from both Texas and Iowa who are going to be speaking. We are really excited to get a chance to hear them, especially because Texas and Iowa are both states that are going through a humongous massive onslaught of anti-trans, specifically, but also just anti-queer legislation. And so hearing from both of these voices is something that, we really, really need to hear. It's timely and it's so necessary. And so just going to the agenda, Shai, if you can go back a slide. Here we go. We've already done staff introductions. That is knocked out and crossed off. Next, we're going to hear from Noel, who's going to kind of detail all of our resources that we have, and also folks from around the country. Many of your states are actually within these resources, by the way. So definitely look out and feel free to shout out your state or a community partner that you have worked with or that you know. Then we're going to jump into our guest presentations from Austin and Iowa. And then one of my favorite things is we're going to do a panel. And so you'll get to hear from Noel, Era from Austin Public Health, and you will also get a chance to hear from Ellen from Iowa. And so after the panel, we're then going to announce our raffle winners. We are doing a raffle, like I said at the beginning, and so make sure that you stick around to see if your name was pulled, and you can win some cool prizes. You can go to the next slide. I am now going to close our mouth and pass it over to our project manager at the National LGBT Cancer Network. He already did an introduction, but now he's going to do a fantastic presentation. So I will throw it on over to Noel.
All right, thanks, Bryce. Thanks so much. You can go to the next slide, Shai. So I'm just going to kind of talk through some examples of Pride, what people have done for in-person and virtual Pride, why Pride's a little different this year, and just some kind of things that we're thinking about at the network. For some of you, this is all a review. You've been doing this work for years. For other people, it might be newer. But I hope that there's something out of these slides and something out of what I'm going to share that will be useful. And again, as Bryce said, feel free to jump in, drop questions in the chat as we go, and we'll save those for the panel. So just a quick, I think most of us are old friends on this call, but just a quick overview. Our mission here at the network is to educate our own communities about health disparities and tobacco and cancer. And we advocate for queer engagement within mainstream cancer and tobacco worlds and make sure that we're included. And we also do as much training as possible to make sure our communities are receiving quality care. So the next slide, as a lot of you know, we're one of 8 disparity networks funded by the CDC. So we're really focused on advancing prevention of tobacco and cancer in priority populations. So we have sibling networks that you know, we focus on rural, American Indian, Alaska Native, Asian Pacific Islander communities, all kinds of different populations that have been disproportionately impacted by tobacco and cancer. So let's go to the next slide. So let's talk a little bit about what's going on this year and why we feel like it's extra important to think about our actions and moves for Pride in 2023. So if you go to the next slide, a lot of you are well aware that obviously as a community and many communities within the LGBT communities, we're growing. And so now around about 7% of the US adults identify as LGBTQ. And so this is obviously driven by much younger folks like the Gen Z population who are contributing to about 20%. But our numbers are increasing. And so we want people to think about, the population's changing, where our communities are a powerful and growing force in the United States, which I think has kind of fueled this backlash. Young adults, again, in particular, feel empowered to publicly claim their identities. And as Bryce always says, I think in a lot of the trainings we do, you're going to get left behind if you're not updating and improving and ensuring that your organization, the work that you do is inclusive of queer communities. So next slide. Unfortunately, and I just updated this yesterday, so hopefully we don't have more than 452 bills right now, but we'll share a link in the chat that the ACLU tracker is keeping track of all these anti-LGBTQ bills. So in 2021 and 2022, we knew, and 2023 were record-setting years for a lot of this anti-queer legislation. So obviously we know these bills are targeting LGBTQ rights and queer life, from transgender healthcare, trans youth in sports, drag shows, kind of runs the gamut. And a lot of this legislation, again, is targeting folks that might be most vulnerable in our communities, some of which are, queer and trans and non-binary young people. So if you go to the next slide. So kind of like, what can we celebrate? What can we celebrate in 2023? And as much and high as numbers of these bills are, in last year in 2022, 91% of these bills failed to become law. So that's a big thing to celebrate. We see these high numbers, but only 9% of them are actually becoming laws. And in fact, in some states, I have to shout out Michigan. This is Gretchen Whitmer, who has a queer daughter here, recently signed last month signed into law codifying LGBTQ protections in the state civil rights law. So we're seeing things like that. We're seeing things like the Trans Bill of Rights, which is being introduced. And you'll probably be hearing more about that. So there's legislation that's also being enacted to support queer lives. So let's go to the next slide. So something that we are kind of thinking about as a staff and having some conversations are like, how are we framing Pride this year? So these are a few things we wanted to share with you all. One, the history of Pride has always been rooted in protest and resistance and rebellion. And so again, a lot of organizers of Prides across the country are really kind of pulling this in and revisiting this as a key theme, like New York City Pride. I can't remember the exact name, but this year their theme is like resilience and resistance or something like that. So a lot of people are kind of getting back to the root of Pride to think about building those connections between all this anti-queer legislation. Second, for decades, LGBTQ events have been protested and threatened. So having folks protest Pride events or queer community is not something that's new. And a lot of contemporary Pride organizers are, have had safety measures in plans for years and are well accustomed to dealing with this. In fact, I was recently talking to someone I know from Equality Texas, and Era, you could maybe talk about this later, but they put out this Equality Texas puts out this Pride safety toolkit that they send out to all their local prides. And I know a lot of other states are doing this as well, just to kind of help people that are participating in Pride, whether you're tabling, volunteering, just to kind of think about keeping yourself safe and others safe at Pride festivals. And I have a link I can share to their 2022 guide. I don't know if they have one out yet for 2023. And then thinking about safety, this is really important this year. So if you and your organization are participating in Pride events, even hosting webinars or doing virtual things, we strongly encourage you to think about the safety and comfort of your team members. For example, if there are out or openly queer members on your team, be sure to discuss, obviously this should be something you do all the time, but especially this year, be sure to discuss people's comfort level with being featured in an article or having your name or pictures publicly accessible. We've been hearing about numerous attacks, unfortunately, for national organizations where people who are presenting LGBTQ cultural competency presentations are being are receiving a lot of threats. So we take that very seriously, and just to kind of consider people's safety and comfort level. And then again, just asking, what do communities need right now? If you are an ally organization, thinking about, what do you need? How can we show up for you at this Pride Festival? So we encourage you to, obviously, we should always be asking those questions. But again, thinking this year, what's the most supportive thing that we as a health department can do for queer communities? And then finally, we do know that some of you are in states or situations where you might not be able to be as visible as you have been in the past, right? You might not be allowed to have a table at Pride this year, or you might not be allowed to change your logo or put a queer flag on your Facebook page this year. So we're trying to think about what are some ways that people can show up when you can't be as visible. So some of these things that we kind of came up with would be offering to meet with organizations or community members in less public spaces to offer your support and share resources. Building resources that are less queer forward. So maybe it doesn't have a big rainbow on it, but that are queer inclusive. So that if you, I know Sean gave a great example, maybe I'll share later, or share in the chat where, it's something, if you're creating a flyer or something, for a state program, making it queer inclusive, but not queer forward can be really powerful. Another thing that we talked about is, staying informed as an ally, what's going on so you can educate others, volunteering your time with queer orgs, building relationships with LGBTQ community centers. Again, you never know how some of these relationships can turn into bigger connections and things like that. So you can go to the next slide. Those are just a few ideas, but we would love for you to drop your ideas in the chat. I know we're all going through different situations and challenges in states that we're doing work in. So feel free to share, are there ways that you think others could show up when you can't necessarily be at a Pride or hang that rainbow flag? But just a couple of things, how can you, so why is doing outreach at Pride important? So we know it's the highest concentration of regional LGBTQ people, especially in rural areas. So a lot of people will travel to larger communities or cities for Pride. So if you're thinking about doing outreach, it's a great place to reach a lot of people or queer folks that you might not normally reach. And again, this year, above all others, it's super important to show support. So people are really, really, really watching. And so your absence says a lot. It's one of those times when, not doing something makes as strong a statement as doing something. So the next slide. So the next slide, Okay, let's see. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of go through some examples. We will say that corporations are engaging. Here's just a little snapshot of all these logos, LinkedIn, Uber, all kinds of folks that, are engaging. So we want to make sure that public health departments are showing up as well and thinking about those important messages that we can send. So next slide. Okay, this is just a little quick background on the history of Pride in dozens of years in 1 minute. So if you go to the next slide. So what is Pride? Historically takes place in June, although we say except in those hot weather states. So sometimes Pride can take place in fall. There are many prides that take place in September or October. Again, it commemorates the Stonewall Uprising, which is really seen as a big tipping point for the gay liberation movement. And then the first Pride took place a year later in 1970. So you can go to the next slide. So how do you find prides to engage with? So obviously just Google LGBTQ Pride for your state. A lot of states have, various different celebrations. I think there's been a big push in the last few years for a lot more local Pride festivals. So instead of, just large cities having a Pride festival, we've seen much smaller festivals because people want to celebrate in their local hometowns. So we say don't ignore smaller celebrations. Sometimes they're more accessible. They can be less expensive to purchase or have a table at, for example. And then we always like to remind people that April, although it's a little late for this year, April is often celebrated as a Pride Month on university or college campuses. So just another consideration there. All right, next slide. And then we definitely want to mention Black Prides. So the Black Pride movement is a movement basically within the US and elsewhere for Black members of the LGBTQ community. So it started in the 90s, and really Black gay pride movements began as a way for folks to commemorate LGBTQ people as an alternative to the kind of the largely white mainstream LGBTQ pride movements at those times. So like Atlanta Black Pride, DC Black Pride, Detroit's Hotter Than July Black Pride are some of the larger ones in the country. But Center for Black Equity, there's a site, if we can drop it or we'll share these slides too, has a lot of information and history on Black gay prides. All right, so next slide. So here's some kind of best practices. Keep going, Shy. We got some breaks. Okay, so flags. Flags are important at Pride. We've got the intersex Pride flag, trans Pride flag, the Philadelphia Pride flag, if you kind of follow across here, the progress. And then last, the intersex inclusive progress Pride flag. So if you have an option, we definitely recommend using a progress Pride flag or an intersex inclusive progress Pride flag at this point. Obviously, don't throw out your old materials that are already printed, but think about moving towards these more inclusive Pride flags when you're thinking about what to utilize. And next slide, we got logos. Here's just a couple quick examples of ways that organizations and governments have changed logos. I think this Vermont one is so cool and pretty. I love how they took their state Department of Health logo and just kind of added that rainbow logo. So these are all just examples of things people have done for Pride Month. And next slide. Okay, so we talk a lot about in-person events, right? But we also want to say that there are a lot of things you can do without attending a Pride in-person, like tabling. So as an organization, you could highlight on the web, highlight resources, highlight your staff, think about engaging employee resource groups if you have them, putting stories in newsletters, and then thinking about if you don't do something related to pronouns, it's a great time during Pride Month to roll out something like, now all of our staff are sharing our pronouns in our email signatures and talking about why that's important. So the next slide. So if you actually attend a Pride in person, that's another way to be engaged. And one of the things that people have asked us, like, how do we get involved? It feels overwhelming, or it feels expensive sometimes to get a table. So we always talk to people and kind of encourage them to think about, does your Pride have a health section or a family section? A lot of people who work at health departments or other like LGBTQ health focused orgs have had a lot of success going in, either sharing a table or being by other health related orgs to kind of find that power in numbers. So that's a kind of a great way to dip your toe in the water or connect with other organizations that are doing similar work. And sometimes they have these like family or health sections. So go to the next slide. Another thing to think about when you're attending a Pride is, and activities that you have, is just to think about intersectional approaches. So, is what you're doing going to be engaging to BIPOC folks, to youth, to gender expansive people? Is it going to be accessible to people with disabilities? Yeah, just some things to think about, when you're designing materials or when you're thinking of activities to engage in. And so the next slide, again, doing smoke-free prides is also a big thing that a lot of people work on. We've got a couple of toolkits, an example. This one's older. The Tobacco Education Clearinghouse of California has a great toolkit. And then the work that Bradbury Sullivan has done in Pennsylvania, we always refer people there because they also have an awesome toolkit, how to even start having those conversations with Pride organizers, all the way through how do you communicate this change to the community. So that's a much longer process, but we'd love to, if anyone's interested in doing smoke-free Pride work, we'd love to connect with you and connect you with others who have been successful in their prides and doing that work. So if you go to the next slide, and then again, I think it's important if you do have a smoke-free Pride to remind people that. And something I've seen more and more is defining what smoke-free means. It seems obvious to us maybe doing this work, but I've seen a lot of things on Pride websites now that's like, yes, we are tobacco and vape and, listing multiple things. Like what does smoke-free really mean, to make sure that people understand that, it also applies to vaping and other things. So next slides. So a big issue, and we talk about this at Pride, is there's a lot of targeted marketing at Pride. We've seen vape, what is it? I can't remember the name of the group that has kind of sponsored Prides in Florida and things like that. But we're seeing things that are a little more hidden lately. So we were recently at an event called, it was the National or International LGBT Leaders Conference, and it's funded or put on by the Victory Institute, which is kind of a collection of LGBTQ elected officials and leaders and advocates from around the country and the world. And we saw that one of their lead sponsors was Altria. And the majority of attendees at this conference, we asked people if they knew what Altria was, and many people didn't. And obviously, a lot of us know that Altria is the parent company of Philip Morris. So they're definitely still infiltrating LGBTQ spaces. If you go to the next slide, here's another example. This is from Atlanta Pride from last year, so 2022. One of their, I think it's a bronze sponsor, was Exhale City. So Exhale City is just like a tobacco vape shop or whatever. But on their website, I went and looked. And this is like, they had a special feature like, we're at Pride. And it's just so fascinating to me, the language they used. Just part that, Exhale City will not just reside inside the parade, but we'll have a booth set up. And the items were handpicked by our team to ensure this year goes completely stress-free. And I just thought that was so interesting, because this was last year when there was a lot of tension and people were anxious about a lot of counter protests. So it's just really like, wow, really pulling on that stress thing. And so this was just on their website, but it's less common, but there's still, again, a lot of vape and tobacco event sponsorship at Pride. And then if you go to the next slide, this is just to say that sponsorship doesn't have to be super expensive. Now for larger Pride events, this is the sponsorship package levels for like New Orleans Pride or New Orleans Pride. So that's like pretty expensive. It could go up to $30,000. But if you go to the next slide, like smaller events, Kansas City Pride, you could do a lot for like $200 up to $7K. So it's just to kind of give a range of sponsorship. They're not all not all super cost prohibitive, but some of them are obviously for the larger city Pride events. And let me see, what's the next slide? Or you can get really creative. This is a great example of maybe more accessible sponsorship, sort of trading like, in-kind advertising. So the Albuquerque, New Mexico, the Gay Agenda Weekly is a little like queer paper that's put out. I think it's also virtual. And it's sponsored by Heal New Mexico, which does a lot of tobacco cessation work. So they actually are, so this newspaper publishes like the Pride, schedule and things like that. And so they have this kind of in-kind thing where they're able to put their ads, in this gay paper that really has a lot of Pride info. So that would be something that people have kind of figured out how to do on a free basis. So next slide. Okay, so I'm just going to go through a quick examples, but you all probably have many, many more. And Era and Ellen are going to show us some great examples. So if you go to the next slide. So this is Project Filter in Idaho, just kind of show some of their swag and some of the things that they've done with their booths. And go to the next slide. Go through these pretty quickly. I'm super proud of Montana. They did this last year. This is from their 2022 Pride. They had their state quit line sponsor Pride. And so this is like the main stage. And it was so cool that the backdrop said, quit line, as all the performers were doing their thing all day. And so they put out this nice ad, and Jack is actually a queer trans man, like a local member of the community. So it's awesome. And I love the work they're doing in Montana. So the next slide. Just again, this is more a cancer example of just doing booths, parades, floats, giveaways. Again, they were focused on, since Pride was in the summer, thinking about sun safety. And these are from Rhode Island. And then I think finally, there might be one more. No. So lastly, I'm just going to close out with a couple of our resources in case folks haven't been reminded the 300th time, just in case you've forgotten any of ours. But if you go to the next slide, I think these are some of our cancer specific or Pride resources. Yeah. So we have postcards, things that you can co-brand that have all kinds of like colorectal cancer is a queer issue, cervical cancer is a queer issue. We also make these cards to say LGBT issue in places that don't feel comfortable with the word queer. If you go to the next slide. Again, this is Out Proud Free. So we've updated and expanded some of these campaigns. So now we have like culturally relevant information. We have a lot of trans-related content, giving examples of how smoking can impact people taking estrogen, for example. So those graphics, again, are all like able to be co-branded and accessed by folks. Next slide. And these are, again, just some LGBTQ issue cards. So you can go to the next slide. And we know that people love their stickers and their rainbow flags. So for in-person prides, we feel like these go over really well. So we have these, we can share them with you. We can send you some stickers. And then if you want to print more, we can also, share the JPEGs. So you can always get them printed locally as well, if you're interested. And then a couple of final things, we have Snapchat filters and Zoom backgrounds. So we've used these Snapchat filters in the past. So we can kind of engage LGBTQ communities. It's kind of cool because you can filter by geographical targeting. So you can kind of pay for them to show up in a certain way. We've created these in the past. I think they're no longer active with the way that Snapchat works, but these are definitely an option where you could fairly easily create something, to share at your prides. And then we also always have Zoom backgrounds, encourage you to get creative with Zoom backgrounds. There's a lot available online. I think most prides are happening in person these days, but there are still some virtual events where this might be useful. And then I think there's just a few Beyond Pride Month. Yes. So obviously we know, if they go to the next slide, that we want to adopt a year-round approach. So again, we're always out here fighting for equality, justice, and visibility, and that just doesn't end in June or October. So we'd love to hear some strategies that you all use, or if you're planning to engage with queer communities beyond Pride or things that you do year-round, feel free to drop your answers in the chat. And next. So these are just a few last things we want to make sure people are aware of, and some resources that you can share with at Pride. A lot of these things we have flyers for that could be printed and put out on a Pride table. So again, we have our queer cancer support groups that meet 3 times a week. And I know Sean is thankfully dropping links in the chat. If you go to the next slide, this is more for healthcare providers. So maybe not for the general public, but we do have our Welcoming Spaces that is still free through the end of 2023. So this is again, like a queer cultural competency training that we put together with the Society for Gynecologic Oncology. Go to the next slide. And this is the program that Shai mentioned. It's a newer program. I'm super proud of the work we're doing in this area, but it's a mentorship program focused on queer and or BIPOC undergrads or early career professionals. So we do career talk, mentoring, networking opportunities. So this is a really cool program that we're really trying to nurture the next generation of public health and tobacco and cancer work. And so the next slide, few more, and we have our Outlast Tobacco Project which Bryce was instrumental in working on. So this is our smoking cessation landing space where we have a lot of support to guide queer folks through the process of quitting and connect them to quit lines. And next. Okay, so finally we made it to our guest presentations. I'm super excited. I'll hand it over to Bryce.
Absolutely, absolutely. Hi, everyone. You can now see my face. I had tech difficulties earlier, but I'm back and now on camera. You all get to see my face, just like I get to see all of your beautiful faces. That was a phenomenal presentation. No, thank you so, so much sharing, especially and especially showcasing what so many folks around the country are doing for Pride and those strategies. I've also been hanging out in the chat. The chat is where it's at. Thank you so much, Sean, for dropping all of those links, and you all have been really, really engaging in the chat. We encourage you all to keep that engagement up as we go to the next presentation, and it's now over to our esteemed guests. I'm going to throw it on over to Era, who works at Austin Public Health. She's going to introduce herself and also talk about the really great work that is going on in Austin, Texas.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Era and I am here from Austin, Texas, coming to you live from my dining room. And I am here to chat about what our involvement in Pride looks like and how we engage. I quickly want to mention that I work for Austin Public Health, like I said, which is a local health department here in Austin. So a lot of the involvement that we have in Pride is sort of coming from the stance of a local health department. And I know some of you work for educational institutions, higher education, or nonprofits or clinics. So like there's lots of different ways to engage with Pride. And I will share ours from the perspective of a local health department. I am the program coordinator for a program called Breathe with Pride, which is a grant-funded program that will reduce tobacco use and tobacco health disparities within LGBTQ folks in Austin, Texas. I am also the chair of Austin Public Health's LGBTQIA+ quality of life initiative. It's basically a staff affinity group within Austin Public Health, and we do a lot of LGBTQ health equity programming, both internally with the department and externally. And one of the things we plan is our agency's participation in Pride. So I'm very involved with Pride, or at least with our involvement in Pride. And I am an out transgender woman who is working in the field of public health for local government in Texas right now. So there is just a lot going on and we are all doing our absolute best. And I am very happy to be chatting with you all. Ooh. Yes, so preparing for Pride with a local health department. So like that slide that Noel shared earlier, there's like all of those different funding levels to participate or support in Pride. One thing that we have found to be very useful is pooling together funds for many different programs in order to be able to set up at Pride and have a tent. We actually have our funding from ARPA, which is like a public health, local health department COVID leftover funding stream. And so we were able to get that fully funded with our ARPA funds this year. But we are tabling and we're representing all of Austin Public Health. So my program that specifically focuses on tobacco prevention, we have swag there, and either me or my colleague is there who work on this program to sort of interact with the community. But what we're really there to do is here to say, like, Austin Public Health is here for the queer community. So we register on behalf of all of Austin Public Health, and just for like a reference for a cost of what it costs for us to register and participate in Pride, we paid, I believe it was around $1,700, and that got us both a 2 or 3 like booth setup at Pride, because we also do STI testing at Pride, as well as marching in the parade. So in Austin, we do the festival during the day and the parade in the evening. And it was around $1,700 for us to participate in both of those. So that just gives like a ballpark reference of how some of the funding works. Like I said, our swag is going to come from our program, but it's also going to come from all of the other Austin Public Health programs that interface with the community in some way. And then Pride, at least in Austin, it happens in August, which like there's a lot of lore around why Pride happens during the hottest month of the year. I don't have a clear answer for folks, but I do know that it is really important to have food and water at Pride. So when you're thinking about funding and the amount of funding it's going to take to participate in Pride, you want to think about feeding and hydrating your staff, because it is a marathon, not a sprint. You want to have funding for swag, because that is, folks love to walk up to a table and get free things, because Pride can be rather expensive. And then you want to also make sure you have funding for registration. When it comes to training, we want to make sure that when folks show up at Pride, there is a way for them to interact with the community that is positive and affirming and beneficial. A lot of folks who table at Pride may be members of the LGBTQ community, which is great, but a lot of them may not be. So we want to make sure that folks are fully showing up for Pride in the right headspace. And some of those things, for example, are not assuming gender pronouns, avoiding ma'am and sir. I, again, live in Texas, ma'am and sir, everything is ma'am and sir here. So we do a lot of training on like how to be respectful without using those words. Mirror language, if someone refers to themselves as queer and it's relevant for you to mirror that language back to them, just feel comfortable using whatever language folks are using when they are chatting with you. And then you might see folks wearing apparel or gear that might belong to a kink or a fetish community. So just like be prepared, be prepared. Pride is really fun and people are able to express parts of their identity in public that they often are not. So just show up like ready to bask really in all of that, because it is really beautiful to see. Something else, as a local health department, we are always responding to what our community is responding to. And what I mean by that is last year during Pride, there was, it was right around the time that there was a big monkeypox or monkeypox cases were rising pretty rapidly in Austin. So when we were like, oh, we're going to show up at Pride, we are with Austin Public Health, like this is, there's a community disparity around monkeypox. So we showed up with informational cards as well about monkeypox. And obviously we've been responding to COVID-19 since 2020. So we really want to show up to Pride because someone might not be coming to the table to get a tobacco cessation resource. They might be coming for something around monkeypox, but then we're able to give them the tobacco cessation resource because they stopped by the table. So just really, we're asking folks, or we always love when folks are like, just extra prepared to respond to what the community is responding to. Thank you. All right, so this is a little bit about tobacco and pride. So my first couple of thoughts on tobacco and pride are figuring out like often where pride is taking place. Pride for us happens outside in a park, and all parks are covered under the smoking in public places ordinance in Austin. So we technically, folks are not supposed to be using tobacco or smoking in public places in parks, but we also have some, I believe it was my first Austin Pride in 2019. There were folks selling CBD products, and there were people smoking CBD products at Pride. So it can become very muddy, especially there's like alcohol vendors at Pride, right? So like folks might not always be adhering to all of the conditions of Pride, or all the conditions of a smoking in public places ordinance. So I would also recommend reaching out to the Pride organizers to see if they're amenable to creating a tobacco-free event policy. I will be pretty frank and say that the Austin Public Health has had a tenuous relationship with Austin Pride because of COVID concerns. In 2021, Austin Public Health recommended that Pride not happen, and we honestly did not give them a lot of notice around that because COVID numbers were rapidly increasing during the Omicron outbreak. And so there's been some animosity between us as a public health agency and Austin Pride organizers. We were back at Pride last year for the first year since the pandemic began. And so it's going to take a little bit of relationship building for us to actually get a sit-down meeting with Pride to see if they're open to creating a tobacco-free event policy. And there are just like a lot of much more pressing concerns that threaten the existence of Pride happening. So we are thinking that this year is not the year to engage with Austin Pride about a tobacco-free policy because we want to find ways to support the existence of Austin Pride, given that we are in local government and we can't really like advocate for or against certain policies at the state level. But that all being said, some prides are covered by smoking in public places ordinances, and some pride organizers are super amenable to creating these policies. So when I am thinking about tobacco and community engagement, these are some of the things that I bring with me to events. I will bring state quitline resources. Often state quitlines have free nicotine replacement therapy for folks, which is really great. So I always bring those quitline resources. Some people don't like picking up the phone to call. So I also have smoke and vape free text resources for folks. And then I always bring LGBTQ specific resources. We love our swag from the Cancer Network, our Out Proud Free buttons or pins always go. People are always attracted to the shiny metal object, right? And then we have our own resources as well. And I will drop the link to our program website in the chat so that folks can check it out. And then next slide. Yes, day of necessities. So is it during the daytime or the nighttime? Is it going to be super hot? We have cooling tents with us with air conditioning, plenty of hydration, like I said, food and water, fans. and making sure that people are comfortable throughout the day. And then staffing necessities. Is Pride broken into a festival and a parade like Austin Pride is, or is it one big event? How are you going to get enough folks to be there all day? Because quite honestly, it is not feasible for folks to be out in the Austin Pride heat for more than like 2 to 3 hours at a time if they're working. And then again, figuring out how to engage with the community in a inclusive and safe way. So those are all of my points. I don't think I have any more slides. But yeah, I'm looking forward to answering some of the questions that I've seen when it's time for the panel. Thanks, everyone.
Phenomenal presentation, Era. I just have to say, especially about that, brother, heat in Austin, I'm in Mississippi. Woo, we know it's real. We know it's real. But I also just especially want to say there was another part of your presentation that I really loved, and hoping that we can just have a couple of minutes to really dig into the Q&A. And I saw some kind of folks talking about it, but also really just pride in rural areas, pride in areas where it might not be the most friendly for LGBTQ plus initiatives. Pride during COVID. You mentioned so many great things. Also swag. And so I'm really excited that we get to delve into that hopefully in the Q&A. And I'm now going to go over to our final guest presentation. Just like y'all enjoyed Era's, y'all are absolutely going to enjoy Ellen's phenomenal presentation. Ellen is from Iowa Department of Health and Human Services. And so I'm just going to throw it to Ellen.
Thanks, Bryce. And hi, everyone. This is a really tough acts to follow here after such great content, but I'm excited to share with you a little bit about what we do here in Iowa. So I'm our program manager for our breast and cervical cancer early detection program. And I'm just going to talk about what we do to promote breast, chest, and cervical screening in Iowa. So next slide, please. Thank you. So first off, I just want to say, one of the strengths of our program is that we do not consider ourselves to be experts, and we know across our state and across the nation, there are other great groups doing this work. And the first step to us being successful in any of our efforts is really partnering with those people, like the folks on this call, and also with our local experts. We have a phenomenal nonprofit organization called One Iowa, who is doing amazing work with equality in our landscape, which, as many people have mentioned, is kind of going through a tumultuous time politically this year. And I'm not going to say a lot about that just because, working at the health department and things, we're just sort of supposed to not really advocate or lobby for anything too much, but provide education, which is always super important. So we really worked with our local experts to do a few things like promoting and developing culturally sensitive and accessible small media items. For those of you who might not use that public health terminology, small media is just really anything that can be quickly, easily distributed, printed, handed out to people. That's kind of what we call small media, and is proven through the evidence to be an effective strategy. So everything that I use my grant dollars for has to be proven to be effective. So I'm grateful that we have this evidence to show that these things do make a difference in influencing people's behavior. We've also worked with them to develop social media campaigns, taking it off of those old school like print materials, bringing it online so people can interact with it in different forums, like we heard about today with Snapchat, Facebook, all the different groups. And then really just distributing materials at all inclusive healthcare facilities, at Pride events, and other ways that we might be working and interfacing with program participants and the public. So if you go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So I just want to show you guys really some of our materials that we've developed with our experts. They used focus groups. They really gathered the hearts and soul of the community to kind of weigh in on these resources and then use them in the communities. So this first one here is a little postcard. It's like a book size. It says, I'm a lesbian. They can no longer pretend lesbians are not or at greater risk for breast cancer. So these are Pulp Fiction novel kind of inspired cards, which really resonated. And so on the front side, you get these kind of risk factors, but on the back side, you get all about the program that I offer. So telling you what we provide, inclusive breast chest exams, mammograms, pap tests, diagnostics tests, help if you don't even know where a doctor is. We can help you get to someone who's inclusive and that we know has been vetted and that their facility has taken training and that they're going to be a safe place for you to go to get care. So next slide, please. So just going on that same theme, all of the backs of these are really similar to what I just described, but my favorite one, I just love this left one. I prefer girls with mammograms, really trying to just encourage people, go get your mammogram, starting at age 40 if you're average risk, younger if you're in need of additional screening. This awesome queer patterns one, just really promoting regular paps and mammos. And this heartbeat one is not only just that square, but also the fan, which like we've talked about, like Pride, hot times. It's here in June, but I mean, Iowa can just throw you any kind of weather. Like today it's 80 degrees out, so whoever knows, but I liked that one because it's just a really nice way to maybe help people cool off or, draw them over to your booth and really like, they're going to take that because they want to use it. Maybe later they'll look at the back of it. Next slide, please. These are some of our newer items that we've also made. So you have on the top, here's the front, and on the bottom is the back of it. So same kind of theme. We just have this cute little slogan, live healthy, live proud, and care for yourself. Our program is colloquially known as Care for Yourself. So we really like to tie that in, help people remember that we're all so busy. It's really easy to take care of everybody else, but it's so, so important to make sure you're making time to care for yourself too. On the back side there, we've got our co-branding with our Cancer Consortium, One Iowa, those experts, and our program logo, as well as our website, phone number, different ways for people to reach us again. Next slide, please. Here's our that trans flag material, which I'm really interested in some of these newer flags that we're learning to me and maybe ways we can update and incorporate some of those too in the future. We use this slogan that I just love. If you've got it, check it. It's a pretty clear message there. It doesn't really get political. It's kind of easy for us to get approved because it's a very like blatant fact. Like if you have this body part, you need to get it checked. There's really nothing controversial about that. It's just what you should be doing to take care of yourself. Next slide, please. So we've also done some breast chest cancer awareness campaigns. This first one here is a little snippet of our video. And if you give me about 3 more clicks, please. We've got some other social media examples here of just the different ways that we were posting and engaging. And sometimes where I said I'm from the health department, we might not be able to post our own content as easily. We like to use our partners and co-brand with them to really get all of our messaging out and drive people back to our website, meet them where they might be going to find a trusted organization like One Iowa that they might be going to, which can help us be a liaison to making sure these people are getting the cancer screenings they need, because we know there are a lot of disparities with people not wanting to receive care for various and like true reasons that they might not feel safe or comfortable. So next slide, please. That's me. And I just wanted you guys to have this in there. So you could please do not hesitate if you're curious or want to learn more or just connect in any way. My information is right there for you.
Amazing, phenomenal presentation, Ellen. I loved so much of that. I'm gonna take a minute to just shout out how good of a presentation that was and really emphasize how appreciative we are for you sharing that. I love, and I know Rebecca said this in the chat, but that messaging is just absolutely stellar. If you've got it, screen it. I know Vermont has the Got 'em, Screen 'em campaign. Absolutely phenomenal. I will drop that link in the chat for Vermont. Oh my goodness, I'm just I'm thrilled that now we get to kind of delve into the panel. And so we get to ask back up both of our phenomenal guest presenters, Era and Ellen, and also joining that conversation is going to be Noel. We also may have staff like me or Sean or Shai who may jump in as well. And we have quite a few questions to get to. So I'm just gonna go ahead and dive right on in to the first question. This is a question that was asked in the chat. It's something that came, I think, in the middle of Era's presentation, but it was about giving a few more examples of how to interact and introduce folks without using ma'am or sir and still being respectful. I know I am a Southerner born and raised, and so that is really, really important that you're really making sure that you're being respectful in your language. So I want to just pose that question first to the panel. Anyone can jump in.
I would honestly just say what you were going to say without using the words. Like, it's chances are, if you were going to be like, hey, how are you, ma'am or sir, like, you can just drop that word and it's totally fine. If you're speaking with, like, treating the person with dignity and respect, which is usually the intention when folks use those honorifics, I think just dropping those honorifics is great and you don't have to use them. And it might be it like can be very uncomfortable for folks to not use those words when talking to strangers, but I promise you the queer community will appreciate that more than it might feel uncomfortable not to use those words, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, and I loved your answer. They're also gonna throw it over to Ellen and Noel to ask their input. I just also wanted to say that, like, and really emphasize what Era said. Yeah, it's gonna be uncomfortable. I always say, especially when it comes to like Southerners, I'm also learning, especially a whole lot about rural communities, that this is really, really important, this respect factor. And so really making sure that you're being intentional about the language that you use, like Era said, to just, drop that, is really, really, really important, because ultimately what folks want is that you're going to respect them. And there are tons of ways to do that without using those, without using that gendered language. I saw Reverend K also ask a question in the chat. I'm going to throw it over to probably Noel. I think Noel is going to also have some really good feedback on this and can probably also speak to Reverend K's point.
Yeah, I'd love to hear Sean weigh in. And so, yeah, Reverend K, actually, I have a couple of teachers that are non-binary that use mix, and that is the correct, from what I understand, pronunciation of MX. So you'd say Mix Clemens, or their last name Mix Smith or whatever. So yeah, definitely, that's how I'd pronounce it. And Sean, feel free to jump in if you wanted to add anything. Also, being in queer in the South.
Yeah, I wrote it in the chat, but sometimes just subbing please or thank you, depending on the context for ma'am or sir, really works. So like usually if you're saying yes, ma'am, like yes, please, or yes, thank you, is a perfectly acceptable kind of substitution. But yeah, this is a big concern, and this is a question I get in every training that I'm in, I swear.
And I think if you have more than if you have a little dialogue with someone, that's your opportunity to also ask and understand their pronouns and understand their, if they would use ma'am or sir, and then you're able to also, start using that. But yeah, you definitely wouldn't want to use that without a conversation or understanding.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for weighing in on that. The next question is what I'm going to start with Ellen on this one. It was a question that I actually had. I know we got another person in the comments to get to. I promise we'll get to that question, but it was something that, like, while Ellen did this phenomenal presentation, it was around the taking care of yourself. I know that we dropped and kind of showed Outlast Tobacco. I just really had the pleasure of, like, really in working on that resource, knowing how important it is that when we're talking about tobacco control, when we're talking about just, inclusion period, that we really need to be focused on mental health and self-care, and really this thing around, that it is so vitally important that if we're going to start talking about transitioning off of these substances, if we're going to talk about having, smoke-free prides or anything like that, that we also have to consider that folks are using these because of their mental health.
Yeah, I think there's so much to unpack there, Bryce. And I think one of the challenges is with working in a health department is that we're very siloed and work on our own programs. But I think one of the amazing opportunities here is what I've heard other people say, is partnering with your entire organization, because we do work closely with our tobacco folks at our department. And we do work closely with the colorectal folks, and we do work closely with all these mental health folks who help people who are of different ability levels. And how can we all come to the table to represent at events like this? Because I might not be the expert for what to do for your mental health, or for what our state tobacco resources look like, or what other portfolios of things might be. But I know that together we're stronger together. And our program's always been called Care for Yourself since I think we started in like 1995. We've been around for forever. And I think just in the past 2 years, we've really had a brand refresh to come up with a consistent gender neutral logo, gender neutral colors, and just really bringing this message home. I know I just recently, in the last 5 years, I've had children, and now it's like, it is so hard to find time to care for yourself, whether all the things you're doing. There's so much fear out there in the world for any reason. Everybody's in their own different place within their life. And I think the best thing that what I see when I work with people is having that non-judgmental, open attitude and meeting people where they are, and it's easy for me to be like a simple message of how can I help you take care of yourself. It's also, now that I'm just saying that, like pretty like gender and inclusive when you say it just like that. So hopefully other people are feeling that respect when you say it that way too.
Oh, I really appreciate your answer, especially, sharing about you becoming a mother, and, and how difficult it is when you are a parent, to really prioritize yourself. I mean, I know that's why, my grandfather started using tobacco. He dropped out of school, in the 4th grade, and he had to start working right away. I know this was quite a long time ago, but when I've talked to people, and what I hear over and over and over again is, we were struggling. We had a lot of things going on. We had a lot. Our cup was like running basically empty. And so it's really, really, really important for you to take care of yourself. I know on Outlast Tobacco, which we dropped in the chat earlier, we framed it as quitting is an act of self-love. And that is really, really powerful. It's really, really true. We all can agree that everyone deserves to take care of themselves and to love themselves. And so I love, love, love that answer. I want to now move on to another question that we got in the chat from Dee in New Jersey about how do you go about swag items in relation to tobacco prevention and cessation?
Yeah, so there are a couple of different channels we get swag from. One of the big smoking cessation text support lines that we have is a program called Smoke Free Text. And I don't know if they are a national program or if they're Austin specific or Texas specific. I want to say, honestly, that they are national, although I'll look at that. I'll do some research and find that by the end of the chat. But they have a ton of swag that we are able to distribute. Our grant that we have is grant funded. So we can't, it's CDC funded, so we're not able to purchase our own swag with our grant. But we have a ton of really awesome swag from Smoke Free Text. And also as a LGBTQ program within APH, we have like general like rainbow swag that we're able to purchase through just like larger Pride funding that we have. And then any swag that's left over after the Pride season is over, basically like the different queer programs will pass that out at events that they're at, which we fall into. And yes, it is a national program. Okay, that is what I thought. And they have a ton of swag. They're really great. They have stress balls, they have card holders for the back of phones, they have chapsticks, which the chapsticks don't really work for us, it's too melty. But maybe if you're in less of a hot place, chapsticks could be fun. They have water bottles, they have drawstring bags. Last year at Pride, we gave out a ton of Smoke Free Text drawstring bags because people were getting swag from all the booths, and they needed a little bag to carry it all in. So that's how we do that. And then from our department, our department has general funds too that we were able to, we're actually in the process of making some Breathe with Pride specific swag right now for the first time, which I'm really excited about. And then some of the things that we pass out at Pride comes from our like office supplies or printing budget. So there's creative ways to play with things that are with, you know, finding ways to get things printed or ordered in a way that is allowable. But I would say smoke-free text is the best.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that, Era. I dropped the link in the chat to to it. I was trying to find where it mentioned the materials. We're going to send all the resources and links out. But I'm so glad that you mentioned that, Era, because it's a phenomenal resource and a really, really great answer. I want to go now to a question this is a question that I noticed other people were talking about in the chat. But it's one that I think all three of you can really especially speak to, particularly Era and Ellen, because there is quite a large percentage of both of your states that are in rural areas. And so really it's this question around, how can you do work right now within queer communities and rural communities, especially when it comes to Pride, especially right now, as both of your states have an alarming amount of anti-queer and trans legislation. I'm going to throw it first to Ellen, but others feel free to jump in afterwards.
Yeah, you're not lobbing us the easy ones, Bryce. I would say the biggest thing for me is relying, like I said before, on our local experts. If it's just me, you can't take me and drop me in a small rural, part of Iowa and expect people to trust me, know who I am, come to me for resources. But what I have the power and influence to do is to help find those groups and help provide them with resources, help support them. Like Era said, maybe I can use some of my printing, my postage budget. Maybe there are ways that I can shift funds around to help support them and generate activities to make sure they're supplied with resources. I know we're really being intentional this year and trying to work on reaching and serving more of our rural communities. But I think it's really about turning to our experts and letting them tell us what to do and to generate their trust to bring us into the conversation and bring us into the room. Also sitting back and listening and not dominating the conversation. I think that's the best I can do, is be there, listen to their needs, and help provide to make sure they're getting what they need.
Absolutely. That is so spot on. This, notion, look, we don't know it all, and that when we're talking about communities that we're doing work in, it's best to let those communities lead the way. And so I love that. Passing it over to Nolan, Era to jump in.
Oh, go ahead, Era.
I honestly, I don't work a lot with rural communities, and I never have, and it's nothing against rural communities. I've just always worked in urban spaces and in public health spaces that work with urban communities. So I will politely step back from this question.
And we've been doing more work, and this is again a topic of interest that we get a lot of TA requests about. And so if people are specifically interested, we can share. There was a great there's a research program out of University of Minnesota, I think, that does a lot of queer rural work, has a lot of great resources and policy white papers. And but I'll say from some of the folks that we've spoke with, you really have to think outside the box and really accept that what's going to work in some larger cities is not going to work in rural areas. And we often, one really successful thing we've seen is partnering with So you may be in a rural area and it might be maybe conservative, but there might be a local college or university. So that's been really successful for some folks to kind of build partnerships or to find some energy, some queer energy, or some folks that are more out. We've seen a lot of success with LGBTQ friendly churches, and just really speak to what Ellen said. Finding those community champions and those community leaders that are trusted is key, and is big. And then, of course, listening to what people need and want in those areas. Oh, that's a great resource. Thanks, Bryce, for dropping that in the chat.
I was trying to find the exact the exact one, but I saw that they had some publications, the University of Minnesota that you mentioned, and they have some other ones that we can feel free to send out afterwards. I'm so glad that you mentioned that. No, it's a great resource. I see, sorry, no, were you done? Were you going to say anything else before I move to Sean? Okay, great. Over to you, Sean.
I was just going to say, one thing that we've found successful in Tennessee is partnering with national organizations that might have presence in rural areas. So places like CVS or Walgreens that might have more national support that do have these clinics in rural areas has been really successful. And then also thinking about when we're doing resource delivery, like working on the main highway corridors, like people don't necessarily think of that as a place for resource delivery, service delivery, if there's in a town specifically like on the highway, but so many different little towns are connected to the larger highways that are going through these big states that we all live in. And so thinking about creatively working with those points where many of the rural people have to go through in order to get to main services due to them being systematically under-resourced. Those are two kind of the tactics that we've used in Tennessee that have been really successful.
I absolutely love that, Sean. And I'm so glad, just side note, so glad that that there is another Southerner on the team who can understand when I say it. But you're so spot on. And also, I've done a lot of work with the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids. I was their Youth Advocate of the Year in 2016, and CVS was very instrumental in helping to support tobacco control. And so really, really, really completely agree with that. And Rebecca in the comments is also mentioning national public health organizations, of course, the voluntaries like American Lung, American Heart, American Cancer Society, their Cancer Action Network are all really great partners. We've partnered with just about all of those. I can also co-sign that they're a really, really, really phenomenal resource. We're now going to go ahead and I know it's time to move on, but I'm enjoying this panel so much. And so I'm having a little bit of a hard time. But I do want us to go ahead and at least move on to transition to the announcement of our raffle winners. And also we are going to just close out and remind you to complete that evaluation. Before we do though, I do want to go around the panel and just, if each person could just say a word, a phrase, you can even do a paragraph of what is a theme or something that as you're going into this Pride season that is on the top of your mind. I'll say for me, I'll give an example to kind of model that because I know I just ask a lot of you all. But my favorite word ever is community. Anybody who knows me knows that I say it all the time. And so when I'm approaching Prides this year, I am thinking about community, especially during these very difficult times. There is, and I heard somebody else say this earlier, there's really strength in numbers. We as a community can come together to support one another and to help fill our own cups up as we're continuing to do this great work. So I'll pass it over to Noel and then Ellen and Era to say their words or phrases.
I feel like I'm going to steal from our newest program that we're doing in New York State. We have a new program called Queer Health is Power. And so I'm going to say power and powerful and sort of speaks to, if you feel like you can be more give more, be more forward facing, be an ally, you know, to do that. And so I'm kind of removing some of my own fear this year and just kind of going into the Pride season to, you know, feel powerful to use my voice.
Whew, I loved that so much. And we are currently just mentioning, you know, the resource that Noel just did. We have a colleague who's been on quite a few of our webinars, Harold Abrams, who's the project manager of that grant in New York State, and really love all of what they're doing. Stay tuned to our newsletters as they're currently working to get a site up and to get resources out. I'm really excited about that work. I'll pass it on over now to Era.
I will say self-care. That is my phrase. I am there's a lot of elements around, like the heat and the sun is an element, the political climate is an element, all of these things. So find ways to care for yourself. Pride season can be very overwhelming. Even for the queerest amongst us, it can be very overwhelming. So find ways to take care of yourself while you are showing up for the community.
I love that. I love that. That's always it's always a wagon that I'm going to be on. And now over to Ellen.
I'm just going to go with be kind, because I think it's so simple, and going off of what Era just said, there's so much you can't control in life, but what I can control is that I'm kind to you and every person. And I think if everybody just acted that way, maybe the world would be a little bit of a kinder and better place. So that's what I'm going to roll with.
Ooh, y'all like knocked it out of the park. I do not want to put this person on the spot, but I'm really curious what their word is. So feel free to don't answer out loud. Feel free to just drop it in the chat whenever you're ready. But I'm really curious what you would say, Sean.
Yeah, community is care and accountability is care. Those are my words for the day.
Ooh, community is care, and you said accountability.
Mm-hmm. Accountability.
Okay. I love that. I love that. I love
that
that.
part.
Absolutely, absolutely. And kindness, and power and self-care and community. I love all of that. And those are all things that that is going to fuel me during the next few months. And I hope they can help to fuel you in the good work that you're doing. Now, drum roll, please, is the time to do, I don't have a drum, but now is the time to do our raffle winners. And we're really excited to get a chance to say thank you to all the folks who are on this call and who took a little time out of their very busy day to hang out with us. We appreciate all of you, and these are totally random drawn, so it's no value in it, but we just wanted to do something fun. So I'll throw it over to Noel to announce who our winners are.
Yeah, speaking of swag, we ordered some National Cancer Network swag for the Pride season. And it's so hot off the press that our images aren't even ready to show you what they are yet. But it is a little a notebook and a bag that has our logo on it. So let me see. We've got a couple winners. Paula Chambers. Oh, yay. So Paula, we'll follow up with all of you. Paula is one of our winners. Mercedes Rodriguez, I think you're from Utah, maybe Mercedes. Anna Marson, might be from LGBTQ Center of OC, is that Orange County? Anna. Allie Cano, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. And then finally, Jonathan Little Pop. So Jonathan. So those are all of our winners. I will follow up with people after the webinar we'll be mailing it to you in probably a few weeks. So slight delay, but you will get it before June. So thank you so much, everyone, for hanging in on the call. And I'll hand it back over to Bryce for our last few slides, I think.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Noel. And a special big thank you to all of you who came to hang out with us. Like Noel said, this is fresh, hot off the press. I've seen those little pride notebooks, and they are the cutest things I have ever seen. I'm a writer, so I will definitely be trying to snag one of those for myself as well. We're gonna have to also, though, Noel, talk about how we can like just get more of these out to everyone who wants to have it in the future, because these could be great incentives and things like that that you carry throughout all of the great work that you're doing, not just in Pride, but over the course of the whole year. And so we've reached the end. And so we have dropped, thank you, Sean, an evaluation link. We really want you to let us know how we did. It helps us to know, you know, if we're doing well, what we need to change. As somebody who's mainly over that, we really appreciate having that you know, feedback to know what we need to change, what you want to see more of. Like I said, during the presentations, we are going to make sure that all the links, all of the slides, and all the other really good juicy nuggets of wisdom, that we're going to make sure that gets sent out after the presentation within the next week. So you all will have that to use as you continue building your own prides and celebrations. The last thing that I did want to say is that, you know, pride is something that is so personal. It is something that is so beautiful to our community. And it's so beautiful that it doesn't have to just happen in June. It happens year round. So please, please, please continue. Make sure that you're doing everything you can to engage and support queer communities. I think I'm preaching to the choir here, because if you are here, it usually means that you are really invested and interested. So feel free to pass this along to other folks. We're also going to make sure that we send out a copy of the recording when it's available, so that you can also send it or save it for your records. And we really, really, really want to thank you for that. Shai, I think you can go to the next slide. I think we're pretty much done. We have, and this is a great chance to mention this, we have amazing staff, and we also have a lot of open positions that are in the process of getting filled. You all got to meet Sean, and we have quite a few more folks who have transitioned out, or who are coming, or who will be on that slideshow very, very soon. So you'll get a chance to meet them. Stay tuned to our newsletters as well. We want to thank you all so much for just taking time to spend with us here, to talk about prides, to talk about queer inclusion, especially in these difficult times. Like I said earlier, time is one of the most valuable resources we have, and we're really honored that you took some time to be with us today. Thank you so much to our guests, Era and Ellen. You all did phenomenal. And I just love that you all are here. Thank you so much to all of our guests. Have to shout out our amazing staff. Noel, Sean, Shai really did so much of the great work in putting this together, and also especially Shai and Sean, a lot of the behind the scenes work. So we really, really appreciate it. Thank you all. And that brings us to a close. We're going to give you 3 minutes back in your day. So enjoy it. Take some time for some self-care. And thank you all for joining us.